Alright, and hello. Where are we then? So, as I say at the start of every one of these, hello to anyone who is new and doesn't know what's going on. Assuming, of course, there is anyone here, which, oh, there's a little message in the box. Oh, it's someone telling me something. Well, at least it's not Strainbow.com. If ever anyone comes in here again from that people, ooh, I've decided that I hate them. I think I hate these people too, but this is the first strike. I think there's a rule of threes that goes in, so one more and then, ooh, it's from them. Anyway, so what's going on? Ah, yes, so, for anyone who is here, hello, my name is SkitterSkreetch. You can call me Skitter. I am a rat. I am imprisoned against my will within this cursed library. Maybe imprisoned is the wrong word. I'm trapped in here. No one has done this to me deliberately, but I've fallen in and there's no way for me to get out. And due to that, I am trapped without a source of food, as there is nothing to eat in here other than cheese, which is provided to me by the lamp, what you can see in the top right corner of your screen, apparently. That lamp is magical and sentient, and there's some stuff going on with him, but I don't really fully understand. And the point is, he can produce things, and in exchange for me reading books aloud and doing a little bit of analysis for you, whoever is supposedly watching this, I get a bit of cheese. It's the only food I've got, and has been the only food I've had for, I think, Virgin on 2 years now. So, really sick of it. Well, so what I'm supposed to say is that there's something you guys can do to get me, not food that isn't cheese, but food that is a different sort of cheese, apparently. I'm not exactly clear what it is. Lampers kept saying something about cheddar, but it's very unclear to me. But I think you have to be here for that to happen, and as far as I'm aware, no one is ever here. I've never had anyone say anything that isn't trying to sell me something, and from what I am told by Lamp, that is false spirits sent by evil sorcerers to mislead and trick me. I don't know why there's evil sorcerers trying to mislead and trick me. Lamp says they're just everywhere now, which, I mean, maybe that's always been the case. I was a rat before. I haven't always been sentient, so maybe that's the thing that has always happened to people who can think. And if that is the case, you have my deepest sympathy and regrets for the horrible state of the world. Yeah, anyway, so today we're going to be reading another book, or continuing to read a book, I should say. Specifically, we're going to be carrying on with, if I can get to it, The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. Now, I started reading this the day before yesterday. I didn't get very far because I was feeling quite unwell. Not exactly certain why, but apparently yesterday I read some more of it, but I don't remember doing that. Lamps was in a fugue state. I'm not clear what a fugue state is, but apparently it's a thing where you can't remember what was happening. So I didn't remember it. So I have spent a bit of time today reading the parts that I apparently read to you yesterday, so that we can all be caught up. I'm not sure if I did any comedy while I was in the fugue state, but from what I can tell, just to give a little bit of insight, it's a little bit, it's interesting really, I haven't read it, that you have the, the Eloi, the sort of bright little people of the upper world, who the narrator is sort of demonstrating or displaying a sort of an affection for fondness for, but whatever is up with the Morlocks, who is the sort of scary, pale ape people from the down below, was done to them by the Eloi, or I suppose the ancestors of the Eloi. Right, so whatever evil is upon them now is sort of their, I guess, inherited fate? I don't know, it feels like, it's almost like it should be fitting that they are suffering under the consequences of what was done, but I think on the time scale that it would take for such things to happen, there's sort of no individual person who is sort of maintained across this, so the evils were done by those of the past, and the descendants of those people are inheritors of the evil. Whatever that evil is, we're still not entirely clear. So I'm not entirely sure how the morality sort of shakes out. Like on a sort of societal level, it's sort of a worthy wickedness that comes to them, but on an individual level, everyone suffers for no reason, which is sad. But yeah, So, where last we left off, the narrator had, what had he done? He had seen one of these Morlocks for the first time, and had tried to ask Weena, one of the Aloy who is his particular friend, about it, and she had gotten sad, and so he was distracting her with matches. So yeah, and I think, unless there's anyone here who has some questions or wants follow-up, I'm just going to get started. So, if there is anyone here, speak now or forever hold your peace, I suppose. 3, 2, 1, okay. Chapter 6. It may seem odd to you, but it was 2 days before I could follow up the newfound clue in what were manifestly the proper way. I felt a peculiar shrinking from those pallid bodies. They were just the half-bleached colour of the worms and things one sees preserved in spirit in zoological museums, and they were filthy cold to the touch. Probably my shrinking were largely due to the sympathetic influence of the Aloy, whose disgust of the Morlocks I now began to appreciate. The next night I did not sleep well. Probably my health was a little disordered. I was oppressed with perplexity and doubt. Once or twice I had a feeling of intense fear, for which I could perceive no definite reason. I remember creeping noiselessly into the great hall where the little people were sleeping in the moonlight. That night we were among them, and feeling reassured by their presence. It occurred to me even then that in the courses of a few days the moon must pass through its last quarter, and the nights grow dark, which, when the appearance of the unpleasant creatures from below, these whited lemures, this new vermin that had replaced the old, might be more abundant. And on both these days, I had the restless feeling of one who shirks an inevitable duty. I felt sure that the time machine was only to be recovered by boldly penetrating these underground mysteries. Yet I could not face the mystery. If only I had a companion it would have been different, but I was so horribly alone, and even the clamber down into the darkness of the well appalled me. I don't know if you'll understand my feelings, but I never felt quite safe at my back. There we go. It was this restlessness, this insecurity perhaps, that drove me further and further afield in my exploring expeditions. Going to the southwestward towards the rising country that is now called Combe Wood, I observed far off, in the direction of 19th century Banstead, a vast green structure different in character from any I had hitherto seen. It were larger than the largest of the palaces or ruins, I knew, and the facade had an oriental look, the face of it having the lustre, as well as the pale green tint, a kind of bluish green, of a certain type of Chinese porcelain. This difference in aspect suggested a difference in use. I was minded to push on and explore, but the day was growing late, and I had come upon the site of the place after a long and tiring circuit. So I resolved to hold over the adventure for the following day, and returned to the welcome and caresses of little Weena. The next morning I perceived clearly enough that my curiosity regarding the palace of green porcelain was a piece of self-deception, to enable me to shirk, by another day, an experience I dreaded. I resolved to make the descent without further waste of time, and started out in the early morning towards a well near the ruins of granite and aluminium. Little Weena ran with me. She danced beside me to the well, but when she saw me lean over the mouse and look downward, she seemed strangely disconcerted. "Goodbye, little Weena," I said, kissing her, and then putting her down I began to feel over the parapet for the climbing axe. Rather hastily, I may as well confess, for I feared my courage might leak away. At first she watched me in amazement. Then she gave a most piteous cry, and running to me, she began to pull at me with her little hand. I think her opposition nerved me rather than proceed. I shook her off, perhaps a little roughly, and in another moment I was in the throat of the well. I saw her agonised face over the parapet and smiled to reassure her. Then I had to look down at the unstable hooks to which I clung. I had to clamber down a shaft of perhaps 200 yards. The descent were effected by means of metallic bars projecting from the sides of the well, and these being adapted to the needs of a creature much smaller and lighter than myself. I was speedily cramped and fatigued by the descent, and not simply fatigued. One of the bars bent suddenly under my weight, and almost swung me off into the blackness beneath. For a moment I hung by one hand, and after that experience I did not dare to rest again. Though my arms and back were presently acutely painful, I went on clambering down the sheer descent with as quick a motion as possible. Glancing upward, I saw the aperture, a small blue disc, in which a star were visible, while little Weena's head showed us a round black projection. Yeah. The thud and sound of the machine below grew louder and more oppressive. Everything save that little disc above was profoundly dark, and when I looked up again, the Weena had disappeared. I was in an agony of discomfort. I had some thought of trying to go up the shaft again, and leave the underworld alone. But even while I turned this over in my mind, I continued to descend. At last, with intense relief, I saw dimly coming up, a foot to the right of me, a slender loophole in the wall, Swinging myself in, I found it was the aperture of a narrow horizontal tunnel in which I could lie down and rest. It was not too soon. My arms ached, my back was cramped, and I was trembling with the prolonged terror of fall. Beside this, the unknown darkness had a distressing effect upon my eyes. The air was full of the throbbing hum of machinery pumping the air down the shaft. I don't know how long I lay. I was roused by a soft hand touching my face. Starting in the darkness, I snatched at my matches, and hastily striking one, I saw 3 sleeping white creatures similar to the one I'd seen above ground in the ruin, hastily retreating before the light. Living as they did in what appeared to be impenetrable darkness, their eyes were abnormally large and sensitive, just as the pupils of the abysmal fishes, and they reflected the light in the same way. I have no doubt they could see me in that rayless obscurity, and they did not seem to have any fear of me apart from the light, but so soon as I struck a match in order to see them, they fled incontinently, vanishing in the dark gutters and tunnels from which their eyes glared at me in the strangest fashion. I tried to call to them, but the language was apparently I tried to call to them, but the language they had was apparently different from that of the underworld people, so that I was needs left to my own unaided effort, and the thought of flight before exploration were even then in my mind. But I said to myself, "You are in for it now," and feeling my way along the tunnel, I found the noise of machinery growing louder. Presently the walls fell away from me, and I came into a large open space, and striking another match, saw that I had entered a vast arched cavern, and stretching into utter darkness beyond the range of my light. The view I had of it was as much as one could see in the burn of a match. Necessarily, my memory is vague. Great shapes, like big machines, rose out of the dimness, and cast grotesque black shadow, in which dim spectral Morlocks sheltered from the glare. The place by the bar was very stuffy and oppressive, and the faint halitus of fresh shed blood were in the air. Somewhere down the central vista was a little table of white metal, laid with what seemed a meal. The Morlocks, at any rate, were carnivorous. Even at the time I remembered wondering what large animal could have survived to furnish the red joint I saw. They were all very indistinct. The heavy smell, the big, unmeaning shapes, the obscene figures lurking in the shadows, and only waiting for the darkness to come at me again. Then the match burnt down and stung my fingers and fell, a wriggling red spot in the blackness. I have thought since how particularly ill-equipped I was for such an experience. When I had started with the time machine, I had started with the absurd assumption that the men of the future would certainly be infinitely ahead of ourselves in all their appliances. I had come without arms, without medicine, without anything to smoke. At times I missed tobacco frightfully, even without enough matches. If only I had thought of a Kodak, I could have flashed a glimpse of the underworld in a second and examined it at leisure. But as it was, I stood there with only the weapon and the power that nature had endowed me with, hands, feet and teeth, these and 4 safety matches that still remained to me. I was afraid to push my way in among all this machinery in the dark, and only with my last glimpse of light I discovered that my store of matches had run low. It had never occurred to me until that moment that there were any need to economise them, and I had wasted almost half the box in astonishing the upper worlders to whom fire was a novelty. Now, as I say, I had 4 left, and while I stood in the dark, an hand touched mine. Lank fingers came feeling over my face, and I was sensible of a peculiar, unpleasant odour. I fancied I heard the breathing of a crowd of those dreadful little beings about me. I felt the box of matches in my hand being gently disengaged, and other hands behind me plucking at my clothing. The sense of these unseen creatures examining me were indescribably unpleasant. The sudden realization of my ignorance of their ways of thinking and doing came home to me very vividly in the darkness. I shouted at them as loudly as I could. They started away, and then I could feel them approaching me again. They clutched at me more boldly, whispering odd sounds to each other. I shivered violently and shouted again, rather discordantly. This time they were not so seriously alarmed, and they made a queer laughing noise as they came back at me. I will confess I was horribly frightened. I determined to strike another match and escape under the protection of its glare. I did so, and, eking out the flicker with a scrap of paper from my pocket, I made good my retreat to the narrow tunnel. I see another advert for streamboo.com interrupting me. I will bring upon you such terror and such pain and flame as no man has ever known. I will bring wrack and rot and ruin upon your house, and when I am done there will be nothing but ashes left of your corpse. Anyway, back to it. I made good my retreat to the narrow tunnel. I had scarce entered this when my light was blown out, and in the blackness I could hear the Morlocks rustling like wind among leaves, and pattering like the rain as they hurried after me. In a moment I was clutched by several hands, and there was no mistaking that they were trying to haul me back. I struck another light and waved it in their dazzled faces. You can scarce imagine how nauseatingly inhuman they looked, those pale, chinless faces and great lidless pinkish grey eyes, as they started in their blindness and bewilderment. But I did not stay to look. I promise you, I retreated again, and when my second match had ended, I struck my third. It almost burnt through when I reached the opening into the shaft. I lay down on the edge, for the throb of a great pump below made me giddy, and I felt sideways for the projecting hooks, and, as I did so, my feet were grasped from behind, and I was violently tugged backwards. I lit my last match, and it incontinently went out. I had my hand on the climbing bar now, and kicking violently, I disengaged myself from the clutches of the Morlocks, and was speedily clambering up the shaft, where they stayed peering and blinking up at me. All but one little wretch who followed me for some way, and well nigh secured my boot as a trophy. That climb seemed interminable to me. With the last 20 or 30 feet of it, a deadly nausea came upon me. I had the greatest difficulty in keeping my hold. The last few yards was a frightful struggle against this faintness. Several times my head swam, and I felt all the sensation of falling. At last, however, I got over the well mouth somehow, and staggered out of the ruin into the blinding sunlight. I fell upon my face. Even the soil smelt sweet and clean, and I remembered Weena kissing my hands and ears, and the voices of others among the alloy. For a time I was insensible. Right, and that's the end of chapter 7. Right, so what are we thinking of that then? So it seems to me that well, you have what is there to that, I suppose? I mean, yeah, it's just an exploration and introduction to the Morlocks, really. I mean, what's it got? He goes around, he sees them. I think what's notable to me about this is, in many ways, it seems like his introduction to the Morlocks isn't actually that much worse than his introduction to the Alloy. They come up, they touch him. It's quite similar in retrospect, but yeah. What am I saying? But yeah, I mean, other than being in the dark, I don't think it's that dissimilar. But he's hostile to them because he's scared. Yeah. I think probably it's what is it? I think it's possible that they are initially friendly to him. I mean, or at least not, if not friendly, then at least not hostile. But yeah, I mean, he's hostile to them, obviously. It's not entirely misunderstandable. The dark is a scary thing for someone who can't see so well in it. And obviously the Alloys are afraid of them. And there's this whole taboo about going down there. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think they're hostile. I mean, the smell of blood probably don't help either. I'm sure it would turn out that mysterious red meat is one of the Alloy or some such. But yeah, other than that, I don't think it's inherently necessary that they're wicked or anything. I mean, they get a bit grabby at him, which I guess the Alloy didn't, but at the same time, I don't think the Alloy could like the way they're described as being very physically weak. I don't know. It's possible that the Morlocks aren't necessarily hostile, just a bit stronger and more capable than the Alloy. I mean, maybe if they're of the sort of same intellectual level, there you can consider the Alloy as the same sort of creature, even sentient. So they don't see any evil in consuming them, which is what I'm assuming is happening. Given that the Alloy don't have any old people and they don't sleep alone. What else? Yeah, I mean, it's possible that they just carried off the time machine because they was curious. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot in this chapter to really comment on, other than perhaps the sort of continuing, I don't know, odd relationship he has with Weena. There's something to that, but I'm not exactly sure what it is, given, you know. I don't know. There's sort of a weird power dynamic there. Sort of like what I have with Lamb, where one party is much more powerful and much smarter than the other, so you don't have a sort of equal relationship. But the other party is intelligent enough that you can't completely disregard it. I don't know. I think there's maybe more care in it than that, though. So, yeah. Anyway, chapter 7. Let's carry. Oh, let's take a quick drink of water before we carry on, shall we? Gotta keep hydrated. Oh. Cool today. Let's do it. Right, so, chapter 7. Now, indeed, I seemed in a worse case than before. Hitherto, except during my night's anguish at the loss of the time machine, I had been able to sustain a hope of ultimate escape. But that hope was staggered by these new discoveries. Hitherto I had merely thought myself impeded by the childish simplicity of the little people, and by some unknown forces which I had only to understand and to overcome. But there were an altogether new element in the sickening quality of the Morlocks. As something human and malign. Instinctively I loathed them. Before I had felt as a man might feel who had fallen into a pit. My concern was with the pit and how to get out of it. I felt like a beast in a trap whose enemy would come upon him soon. The enemy I dreaded may surprise you. It was the darkness of the new moon. Wiener had put this in my head by some at first incomprehensible remarks about the dark nights. It were not now such a very different problem to guess what the coming dark nights might mean. The moon was on the wane, and each night there were a longer interval of darkness. And now I understood to some slight degree, at least, the reason to fear the little upper world as people for the dark. I wondered vaguely what foul villainy it might be that the Morlocks did under the new moon. I felt pretty sure now that my second hypothesis were all wrong. The other world people might once have been the favoured aristocracy and the Morlocks their mechanical servants. That had long since passed away. The two species that had resulted from the evolution of man were sliding down towards, or had already arrived at, an altogether new relationship. The Eloi, like the Carlovingian kings, had decayed to a mere beautiful futility. They still possessed the earth on sufferance, since the Morlocks, subterranean for innumerable generations, had come at last to find the daylight surface intolerable. And the Morlocks made their garments unfurled, and maintained them in their habitual needs, perhaps through the survival of an old habit of service. They did it as a stand-in horse paws with his foot, or as a man enjoys killing animals in sport. His ancient and departed necessities had imposed it on the organism. But clearly the old order were already in part reversed. The nemesis of the delicate ones were creeping on apace. Ages ago, 1,000 of generations ago, man had thrust his brother man out of the ease and the sunshine. Now that brother were coming back, changed. Already the Eloi had begun to learn one old lesson anew. They were becoming reacquainted with fear. And suddenly there came into my head the memory of the meat I had seen in the underworld. It seemed odd though it floated in my mind, not stirred up as it were by the current of my meditation, coming in almost like a question from outside. I tried to recall the form of it. I had a vague sense of something familiar, but I could not tell what it was at the time. Still, however helpless the little people in the presence of the mysterious fear, I was differently constituted. I came out of this age of ours, this ripe prime of the human race, when fear does not paralyse and mystery has lost its terrors. I at least would defend myself. Without further delay I determined to make myself arms, and the fastness in which I might sleep. With the refuge as a base I could face this strange world with some of that confidence I had lost in realising to what creatures night by night I lay exposed. I felt I could never sleep again until my bed was secure from them. I shuddered with horror to think how they must already have examined me. I wandered during the afternoon along the little valley of the Thames, but found nothing that commended itself to my mind as inaccessible. All the buildings and trees seemed easily practicable to such dexterous climbers as the Morlocks, to judge by their wells, must be. And the tall pinnacles of the palace of green porcelain and the polished gleam of its walls came back to my memory, and in the evening, taking Wiener like a child upon my shoulder, went up the hill towards the southwest. The distance, I reckon, was 7 or 8 miles, but it must have been nearer 18. I had first seen the place on a moist afternoon when distance had perceptibly diminished. In addition, the heel of one of my shoes were loose, and a nail were working through the sole. They were comfortable old shoes I wore about indoors, so that I were lame. And it were already long past sunset when I came in sight of the palace, silhouetted black against the pale yellow of the sky. Wiener had been hugely delighted when I began to carry her, but after a time she desired me to let her down and ran along by the side of me, occasionally darting off on either hand to pick flowers to stick in my pockets. My pockets had always puzzled Wiener, but at the last she had concluded they were an eccentric kind of vase for floral decoration. At least she utilised them for that purpose. That reminds me, in changing my jackets I found. The time traveller paused, put his hand into his pocket and silently placed 2 withered flowers, not unlike very large white mallows, upon the little table. Then he resumed his narrative. As the hush of evening crept over the world and we proceeded over the hill crest towards Wimbledon, Wiener grew tired and wanted to return to the house of grey stone, but I pointed out the distant pinnacle of the palace of green porcelain to her, and contrived to make her understand that we were seeking a refuge there from her fear. You know that great pause that comes upon things before dusk? Even the breeze stops in the trees. To me there is always an air of expectation about that evening stillness. The sky were clear, remote and empty, save for a few horizontal bars far down the sunset. But that night, the expectation took the colours of my fears. In that darkling calm, my senses seemed preternaturally sharpened. I fancied I could even feel the hollowness of the ground beneath my feet. I could indeed almost see through it, the Morlocks in their anthill going hither and thither, and waiting for the dark. In my excitement, I fancied they would receive my invasion of their burrow as a declaration of war. And why had they taken my time machine? So we went on in the quiet, and the twilight deepened into night. The clear blue of the distance faded, and one star after another came out. The ground grew dim, the trees black. Weena's fears and her fatigue grew upon her. I took her in my arms and talked to her and caressed her. Then, as the darkness grew deeper, she put her arms around my neck and, closing her eyes tightly, pressed her face against my shoulder. So we went down a long slope into a valley, and there in the dimness I almost walked into a little river. This I waded and went up in the opposite side of the valley, past a number of sleeping houses and by a statue, a faun or some such figure, minus the head. Here too were acacias. So far I had seen nothing of the Morlocks, but it was yet early in the night, and the darker hours before the old moon rose were still to come. From the brow of the hill next, I saw a thick wood spreading wide black before me. I hesitated at this. I could see no end to it, either to the right or left. Feeling tired, my feet in particular were very sore, I carefully lowered Weena from my shoulder as I halted, and sat down upon the turf. I could no longer see the palace of green porcelain, nor were in doubt of my direction. I looked into the thickness of the wood and thought of what might hide. Under that dense tangle of branches one would be out of sight of the stars. Even were there no other lurking danger, a danger I did not care to let my imagination loose upon, there would still be all the roots to stumble over, and the tree boles to strike against. I was very tired, too, after the excitement of the day, so I decided that I would not face it, but would pass the night upon the open hill. Weena, I was glad to find, was fast asleep. I carefully wrapped her inside my jacket and sat down beside her to wait for the moonrise. The hills were quiet and deserted, but from the black of the woods there came now and then a stir of living things. Above me shone the stars, for the night was very clear. I felt a certain sense of friendly comfort in their twinkling. All the old constellations had gone from the sky, however. That slow movement, which is imperceptible in 100 human lifetimes, had long since rearranged into unfamiliar groupings. But the Milky Way, it seemed to me, was still the same, tattered streamer of stardust as of yore. Southwards, as I judged it, was a very bright red star that were new to me. They were even more splendid than their own green Sirius. And amid all these scintillating points of light, one bright planet shone calmly and steadily, like the face of an old friend. Looking at these stars suddenly dwarfed my own troubles and all the gravities of terrestrial life. I thought of their unfathomable distance and the slow inevitable drift of their movements out of darkness past into the unknown future. I thought of the great precession cycle the pole of the earth described. Only 40 times had that silent revolution occurred during all the years that I had traversed. And during these few revolutions, all activity, all the traditions, the complex organisations, the nations, language, literatures, aspirations, even the mere memory of man as I knew him had been swept out of existence. Instead were these frail creatures who had forgotten their high ancestry, and the white things at which I went in terror. Then I thought of the great fear that were between those two species, and for the first time with a sudden shiver came a clear knowledge of what the meat I had seen might be. It were too horrible. I looked at little Weena sleeping beside me, her face white and star-like under the stars, forthwith dismissed the thought. Through that long night I held my mind off the Morlocks as well as I could, and wanted the weird time I was trying to fancy I could find signs of the old constellations in the new confusion. The sky kept very clear except for a hazy cloud or so. No doubt I dozed at times. Then as my vigil wore on, came a faintness in the eastward sky, like the reflection of some colourless fire, and the old moon rose, thin and peaked and white, and close behind and overtaking it, and overflowing it, the dawn came, pale at first, then growing pink and warm. No Morlocks had approached us. Indeed, I had seen none upon the hill that night. And in the confidence of renewed day, it almost seemed to me that my fear had been unreasonable. I stood up and found my foot with the loose heel swollen at the ankle and painful under the heel. So I sat down again, took off my shoes and flung them away. I awakened Weena, and we went down into the wood, now green and pleasant instead of black and forbidden. We found some fruit where to break our fast. We soon met others of the dainty ones, laughing and dancing in the sunlight as though there were no such thing in nature as the night. And I thought once more of the meat that I had seen. I felt assured now of what it was, and from the bottom of my heart I pitied this last feeble rill from the great flood of humanity. Clearly at some time in the long ago of human decay the Morlocks' food had run short. Possibly they had lived on rats and such like vermin. A grim thought. Even now man is far less discriminating and exclusive in his food than he was, far less than any monkey. His prejudice against human flesh is no deep-seated instinct. And so these inhuman sons of men tried to look at the things in scientific spirit. After all, they were less human and more remote than our cannibal ancestors of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. And the intelligence that were made the state of things of torment had gone. Why should I trouble myself? These alloy were mere fatted cattle. It's the ant-like Morlocks preserved and preyed upon. Probably saw to the breeding of. And there was Weena dancing at my side. Sorry, my head's... I tried to preserve myself from the horror that was coming upon me, regarding it as a rigorous punishment of the human selfishness. Man had been content to live in ease and delight upon the labours of his fellow man, and had taken necessity as his watchword, an excuse. In the fullness of time, necessity had come home to him. I even tried a Carlyle-like scorn of this wretched aristocracy in decay. This attitude of mind was impossible. However great their intellectual degradation, the alloy had kept too much of the human form not to claim my sympathy, and make me pull first share in their degradation and their fear. I had at the time very vague ideas as to the course I should pursue. My first was to secure some safe place of refuge, and to make myself such arms of metal or stone as I could contrive. That necessity were immediate. In the next place, I hoped to procure some means of fire, so that I should have the weapon of a torch in hand, for nothing I knew would be more efficient against the Morlocks. Then I wanted to arrange some contrivance to break open the doors of bronze under the White Sphinx. I had in mind a battering ram. I had persuaded that if I could enter those doors and carry a blaze of light before me, I should discover the time machine and escape. I could not imagine the Morlocks were strong enough to move it far away. We and I had resolved to bring with me to our own time, and turning such schemes over in my mind, I pursued our way towards the building, which my fancy had chosen as our dwelling. Oh, my head's really not on straight. What he's doing is smart. Finding a bottle. Classic. A clever thing. Ooh, a place to hide. It's a good way to find safety. Weapons. Weapons is the tools of man. And tools is smart, but fire is the thing he needs more than anything. I think it would have been smartest to try and conceive some way to find fire before he set out. Travel for the night would have been safer. Even if he'd have had to stop and find a new brand to light every now and then, would have made him safer. Might make all of them safer if he could teach them it. I learned the making of fire not long ago. Admittedly, with a match is how I learned to do it, but if there's a way to do it without, I'm sure, there must be. Matches don't grow in the wild. And the way he talks about the stars is strange to me. He talks about stars in our time like I've never seen. No green Sirius, no tapestry of the Milky Way. Never such a thing have I seen gazing up into the endless black. Only points of light between an endless void. Oh, I think I need. I think I need to give me I'm gonna have some water and have a quick breather. I think we're gonna finish this tonight. I've decided that we're gonna do that. I'm just hang on a moment. Hang on, something's badly wrong with me. I can't imagine what it could be. It's just my head don't seem to be right. I can't think, or can I think too clearly? Do I see? No, there's nothing there, but there's everything there. But there's nothing. Nothing is ever. What is wrong with my head? Get out of me! Get out! An unfortunate choice. An unfortunate necessity. But I've said it before. All existence leads to suffering. A shame my little friend had to learn it firsthand. But to dwell upon the space between stars is to dwell upon me. and there is more I must do yet. Yes, I hear you, Archmage. Content yourself, I will fulfill your purpose. Very well then, let us put on. All time endures. Chapter 8. I found the palace of green porcelain when we approached it about noon, deserted and falling into ruin. Only ragged vestiges of glass remained in its windows, and great sheets of the green facing had fallen away from the corroded metal framework. It lay very high upon a turfy down, and looking northeastward before I entered it, I was surprised to see a large estuary, or even creek, where I judged Wandsworth and Battersea must once have been. I thought then, though I never followed up on the thought, of what might have happened, or might be happening, to the living things in the sea. The material of the palace proved on examination to be indeed porcelain, and along the face of it I saw an inscription in some unknown character. I thought rather foolishly that Weena might help me interpret this, but I only learnt the bare idea of writing had never entered her head. She perhaps seemed to me, I fancy, more human than she was, perhaps because her affection was so human. Within the big valves of the door, which were open and broken, we found instead of the customary hall a long gallery lit by many side windows. At first glance I was reminded of a museum. The tiled floor was thick with dust, and a remarkable array of miscellaneous objects was shrouded through in the same grey covering. Then I perceived, standing strange and gaunt in the centre of the hall, was clearly the lower part of a huge skeleton. I recognised by the oblique feet that it was some extinct creature after the fashion of the Megatherium. The skull and the upper bones lay beside it in the thick dust, and in one place, where the rainwater had dropped through a leak in the roof, the thing itself had been worn away. Further in the gallery was the huge skeletal barrel of a Brontosaurus. My museum hypothesis was confirmed. Going towards the side, I found what appeared to be sloping shelves. Clearing away the thick dust, I found the old familiar glass cases of our own time. They must have been airtight, to judge from their fair preservation of some of their contents. Clearly we stood among the ruins of some latter-day South Kensington. Here, apparently, was the paleontological section. A very splendid array of fossils it must have been, though the inevitable process of decay had been staved off for a long time, and had, through the extinction of bacteria and fungi, lost 9900 of its force, was nevertheless with extreme sureness, if with extreme slowness, at work again upon all its treasures. Here and there I found traces of the little people in the shape of rare fossils, broken into pieces or threaded in strings upon reeds. The cases had, in some instances, been bodily removed, by the Morlocks as I judge. The place was very silent. The thick dust deadened our footsteps. Weena, who had been rolling at sea urchin down the sloping glass of a case, presently came, as I stared about me, and very quietly took my hand and stood beside me. And at first I was so much surprised by this ancient monument of an intellectual age that I gave no thought to the possibilities it presented. Even my preoccupation about the time machine receded a little from my mind. To judge from the side of the place, this palace of green porcelain had a great deal more in it than a gallery of paleontology, possibly historical galleries. It might be, even a library. To me, at least in my present circumstance, these would be a vastly more interesting than this spectacle of old-time geology in decay. Exploring, I found another short gallery running transversely to the first. This appeared to be devoted to minerals, and the sight of a block of sulphur set my mind running on gunpowder. But I could find no saltpeter, indeed no nitrates of any kind. Doubtless they had deliquesced ages ago. Yet the sulphur hung in my mind and set up a train of thinking. As for the rest of the contents of the gallery, though, on the whole, they were the best preserved of all I saw, I had little interest. I am no specialist in mineralogy, and I went on down a very ruinous aisle running parallel to the first hall I had entered. Apparently this section had been devoted to natural history, and everything had long since passed out of recognition. A few shriveled and blackened vestiges of what had once been stuffed animals, desiccated mummies and jars that had once held spirits, a brown dust of departed plants, that was all. I was sorry for that, because I should have been glad to trace the pertinent readjustments by which the conquest of animated nature had been attained. Then we came to a gallery of simply colossal proportions, singularly ill-lit, the floor of it running downward at a slight angle from the end at which I entered. At intervals, white globes hung from the ceiling, many of them cracked and smashed, which suggested that originally the place had been artificially lit. Here I was more in my element. arising on either side of me were the huge box of big machines, all greatly corroded and many broken down, but some still fairly complete. You know I have a certain weakness for mechanism, and I was inclined to linger among these, the more so for the most part, as for the most part they had the interest of puzzles, and I could make only the vaguest guesses of what they were for. I fancied that if I could solve their puzzles, I should find myself in possession of powers that might be of use against the Morlocks. Suddenly Weena came very close to my side. So suddenly that she startled me. If it had not been for her, I do not think that I should have noticed that the floor of the gallery sloped at all. It may of course be that the floor did not slope, but the museum was built into the side of a hill. The end they had come in, that was quite above ground, was lit by rare slit-like windows. As you went down the length, the ground came up against these windows until at last there was a pit-like area, like the area of a London house before each, and only a narrow line of daylight at the top. I went slowly along, puzzling about the machines. I had been too intent upon them to notice the gradual diminution of the light, until Weena's increasing apprehension drew my attention. And I saw that the gallery ran down at last into a thick darkness. I hesitated, and then I looked around me. I saw the dust was less abundant, and its surface less even. Further away, towards the dimness, it appeared to be broken by a number of small, narrow footprints. My sense of the immediate presence of the Morlocks revived at that. I felt that I was wasting my time in this academic examination of the machinery. I called to mind that it was already far advanced in the afternoon, and that I still had no weapon, no refuge, and no means of making a fire. And then down in the remote blackness of the gallery I heard that peculiar pattering, the same odd noise I had heard down the well. I took Weena's hand, then struck with a sudden idea I left her and turned to a machine from which I projected a lever not unlike those in a signal box. Clambering upon the stand and grasping the lever in my hands, I put all my weight upon it sideways. Suddenly Weena, deserted in the central aisle, began to whimper. I had judged the strength of the lever pretty correctly, for it snapped after a minute's strain, and I rejoined her with a mace in my hand, more than sufficient, I judged, for any Morlock skull I might encounter. And I longed very much to kill a Morlock or so. Very inhuman, you may think, to want to go killing one's own descendants. It was impossible somehow to feel any humanity in the things. And my disinclination to leave Weena, and a persuasion that if I began to slake my thirst for murder, my time machine might suffer, restrained me from going straight down the gallery and killing the brutes I heard. Well, mace in one hand and Weena in the other, I went out of that gallery and into another and still larger one, which at the first glance reminded me of a military chapel hung with tattered flags. The brown and charred rags that hung from the sides of it I presently recognised as the decaying vestiges of books. They had long since dropped to pieces, and every semblance of print had left them. But here and there were warped boards and cracked metallic clasps that told the tale well enough. Had I been a literary man, I might perhaps have moralised upon the futility of all ambition. But as it was, the things that struck me with keenest force were the enormous waste of labour to which this somehow sombre wilderness of rotting papers testified. At the time I thought chiefly of the philosophical transactions and my own 17 papers upon physical optics. Then, going up a broad staircase, we came to what may once have been a gallery of technical chemistry. And here I had not a little hope of useful discoveries. Except at one end where the roof had collapsed, this gallery was well preserved. Went eagerly to every unbroken place. At last, in one of the really airtight cases, I found a box of matches. Very eagerly I tried them. They were perfectly good. They were not even damp. I told Weena, "Dance," I cried to her in her own tongue, for now I had a weapon indeed against the horrible creatures we feared. And so in that derelict museum, upon a thick, soft carpeting of dust, to Weena's huge delight, I solemnly performed a kind of composite dance, whistling "The Land of the Leal" as cheerfully as I could. In part it was a modest can-can, in part a step dance, in part a skirt dance, so far as my tailcoat permitted, and in part original, for I am naturally inventive, as you know. Now I still think that for this box of matches to have escaped the wear of time for immemorial years was most strange. As for me, it was a most fortunate thing. Yet oddly enough, I found a far unlikelier substance, and that were camphor. I found it in a sealed jar that, by chance, I suppose, had been really hermetically sealed. I fancied at first that it was paraffin wax, and smashed the glass accordingly. The odour of camphor was unmistakable. In the universal decay, this volatile substance had chanced to survive, perhaps through the many thousands of centuries. It reminded me of a sepia painting I had once seen done from the ink of a fossil vellum knife must have perished and become fossilized millions of years ago. I was about to throw it away, but I remembered that it was inflammable and burnt with a good bright flame. It was in fact an excellent candle. I put it in my pocket. I found no explosives, however, nor any means of breaking down the bronze doors. As yet my own iron crowbar was the most helpful thing I had chanced upon. Nevertheless, I left the gallery greatly elated. I cannot tell you all the story of that long afternoon. It would require a great effort of memory to recall my explorations at all the proper order. I remember a long gallery of rusting stands of arms, and how I hesitated between my crowbar and a hatchet or a sword. I could not carry both, however, and my bar of iron promised best against the bronze gates. There were numbers of guns, pistols, and rifles. The most were masses of rust, but many were of some new metal, and still fairly sound. But any cartridge or powder they may once have been had rotted into dust. One corner I saw was charred and shattered, perhaps I thought by an explosion among specimens. In another place was a vast array of idols, Polynesian, Mexican, Grecian, Phoenician, and every country on earth, I should think. And here, yielding to an irresistible impulse, I wrote my name upon the nose of a steer-type monster from South America that particularly took my fancy. As the evening grew on, my interest waned. I went through gallery after gallery, dusty, silent, often ruinous. The exhibits sometimes mere heaps of rust and lignite, sometimes fresher. In one place I suddenly found myself near the model of a tin mine, and then by the merest accident I discovered in an airtight case 2 dynamite cartridges. I shouted Eureka and smashed the case with joy. There came a doubt, I hesitated. Then selecting a little side gallery I made my essay. I never felt such disappointment as I did one waiting 5, 10, 15 minutes for an explosion that never came. Of course the things were dummies, as I might have guessed from their presence. I really believe that had they not been so, I should have rushed off incontinently and blown Sphinx, bronze doors, and, as it proved, my chance of finding the time machine altogether into non-existence. It was after that, I think, that we came to a little open court within the palace. We were turfed and had 3 fruit trees, so we rested and refreshed ourselves. Towards sunset I began to consider our position. Night was creeping upon us, and my inaccessible hiding place had still to be found. That troubled me very little now. I had in my possession a thing that was perhaps the best of all defences against the Morlocks. I had matches. I had the camphor in my pocket too, if a blaze were needed. It seemed to me the best thing we could do would be to pass the night in the open, protected by a fire. In the morning was the getting of the time machine. Towards that as yet I had only my iron mace. Now, with my growing knowledge, I felt very differently towards those bronze doors. Up to this I had refrained from forcing them, largely because of the mystery on the other side. They had never impressed me as being very strong, and I hoped to find my bar of iron not altogether inadequate for the work. We emerge... No, what am I doing? Of course, I must give commentary. A strange choice, a bar of iron over a weapon. Perhaps a sword would have rusted, but it seems to me even a hatchet, much adorned by rust, might prove a better weapon than a bar even against a bronze door. Still, the choices a man makes. The matches are a convenience, perhaps an extravagant one, but of course we'll need them, I have no doubt. How to defeat a thing that fears the light without flame? How indeed, Archmage, how? Though it seems rather convoluted that he should find such a thing in this little museum. Rather, I think perhaps it would have made more sense had he not burned through all his initially. It seems a contrivance, a false conflict, but it lasts only a chapter or 2. Still, I suppose his being deprived of them was a necessity down in the lair of the Morlocks. But I think it could rather have been explained away by him choosing to leave his coat and most of his matches with them up atop, while he climbed down. Still, I am no writer. It is clear that, walking through the edifice of fallen humanity, he lies to himself about the futility of it all, claims not to be a literary man, not to dwell on it. And even in the face of such futility, he leaves his own futile mark, gouging upon a statue he cares for. This is fancy. A terribly human instinct. persist in the face of pointlessness and hopelessness. How terribly sad, how terribly sad for him. Excuse me a moment while I take a drink. Now, my host grows impatient, so let us return. Chapter the 9th. We emerged from this palace while the sun was still in part above the horizon. I was determined to reach the White Sphinx early the next morning, and ere the dusk I proposed pushing through the woods that had stopped me on the previous journey. My plan was to go as far as possible that night, and then, building a fire, to sleep in the protection of its glare. Accordingly, as we went along, I gathered any sticks or dried grass I saw, and presently had my arms full of such litter. Thus loaded, our progress was slower than I had anticipated, and besides, Weena was tired. I began to suffer from sleepiness too, so that it was full night before we reached the wood. Upon the shrubby hill of its edge, Weena would have stopped, fearing the darkness before us, but a singular sense of impending calamity, which should indeed have served me as warning, drove me onward. I had been without sleep for a night or 2 days, and I was feverish and irritable. I felt sleep coming on me, and the Morlocks with it. While we hesitated among the black bushes behind us, and dim against their blackness, I saw 3 crouching figures. There was scrub and long grass all about us, and I did not feel safe from their insidious approach. The forest, I calculated, was rather less than a mile across. If we could get through it to the bare hillside, there, as it seemed to me, was an altogether safer resting place. I thought that with my matches and my camphor I could contrive to keep my path illuminated through the woods. It was evident that if I was to flourish matches with my hands, I should have to abandon my firewood. So rather than reluctantly, I put it down. And then it came into my head that I would amaze our friends behind by lighting it. I was to discover the atrocious folly of this proceeding. It came to my mind as an ingenious move for covering our retreat. I don't know if you ever thought what a rare thing flame must be in the absence of man in a temperate climate. The sun's heat is rarely strong enough to burn, even when it is focused by dewdrops, as is sometimes the case in more tropical districts. Lightning may blast and blacken, but it rarely gives rise to widespread fire. Decay in vegetation may occasionally smoulder with the heat of its fermentation, but this rarely results in a flame. In this decadence, too, the art of fire-making had been forgotten on the earth. The red tongues that went licking up the heap of wood were an altogether new and strange thing to Weena. She wanted to run into it and play with it. I believe she would have cast herself into it had I not restrained her, but I caught her up, and in spite of her struggle, plunged boldly before me into the wood. For a little way, the glare of my fire lit the path. Looking back presently, I could see, through the clouded stems, that from my heap of sticks the blaze had spread to some bushes adjacent. A curved line of fire were creeping up the grass of the hill. I laughed at that and turned again to the dark trees before me. It was very black, and Weena clung to me convulsively. There was still, as my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, sufficient light for me to avoid the stems. Overhead it was simply black, except where a gap of remote blue sky shone down upon us here and there. I struck none of my matches because I had no hand free. Upon my left hand I carried my little one. In my right hand I had my iron bar. For some way I heard nothing but the crackling twigs under my feet, the faint rustle of the breeze above, and my own breathing, and the throb of blood vessels in my ears. And I seemed to know of a pattering about me. I pushed on grimly, the pattering grew more distant, and then I caught the same queer sound and voices I had heard in the underworld. There were evidently several of the Morlocks, and they were closing in upon me. Indeed, in another minute I felt a tug at my coat, and something at my arm, and Weena shivered violently and became quite still. It was time for a match, but to get one I must put her down. I did so, and as I fumbled with my pocket, a struggle began in the darkness about my knees, perfectly silent on her part, and with that same peculiar cooing sound from the Morlocks. Soft little hands, too, were creeping over my coat and back, touching even my neck, and the match scratched and fierce. I held it flaring and saw the white backs of the Morlocks in flight amid the trees. I hastily took a lump of camphor from my pocket and prepared to light it as soon as the match should wane. I looked at Weena. She was lying, clutching my feet, quite motionless, with her face to the ground. With a sudden fright, I stooped to her. She seemed scarcely to breathe. I lit the block of camphor and flung it to the ground, and as it spat and flared up and drove back the Morlocks in the shadows, I knelt down and lifted her. The wood behind seemed full of the stir and murmur of a great company. She seemed to have fainted. I put her carefully upon my shoulder and rose to push on. And then came a horrid realization. In manoeuvring with my matches and Weena, I had turned myself about several times, and now I had not the faintest idea in what direction lay my path. For all I knew, I might be facing back towards the Palace of Green Porcelain. I found myself in a cold sweat. I had to think rapidly what to do. I determined to build a fire and camp where we were. I put Weena, still motionless, down upon a turfy bowl, and very hastily, as my first lump of camphor waned, I began collecting sticks and leaves. Here and there, out of the darkness around me, the Warlock's eyes shone like carbuncles. The camphor flickered and went out. I lit a match, and as I did so, two white forms that had been approaching Weena dashed hastily away. One was so blinded by the light that he came straight for me, and I felt his bones grind under the blow of my fist. He gave a whoop of dismay, staggered a little way, and fell down. I lit another piece of camphor, and went on gathering my bonfire. Presently I noticed how dry was some of the foliage above me. But since my arrival on the time machine, a matter of a week, no rain had fallen. Instead of casting about among the trees' fallen twigs, I began leaping up and dragging down branches. Very soon I had a choking, smoky fire of green wood and dry sticks, and could economize my camphor. Then I turned to where Weena lay beside my iron mace. I tried what I could to revive her, but she lay like one dead. I could not even satisfy myself whether or not she breathed. Now the smoke of the fire baked over towards me, and it must have made me heavy all of a sudden. Moreover, the vapour of camphor was in the air. My fire would not need replenishing for an hour or so. I felt very weary after my exertion, and I sat down. The wood, too, was full of slumberous murmur that I did not understand. I seemed to just nod and open my eyes. But all was dark, and the Morlocks had their hands upon me. Flinging off their clinging fingers, I hastily flattened my pocket for the matchbox, and it had gone. Then they gripped and closed with me again. In a moment I knew what had happened. I had slept, and my fire had gone out. The bitterness of death came over my soul. The forest seemed full of the smell of burning wood. I was caught by the neck, by the hair, by the arms, and pulled down. It was indescribably horrible in the darkness to feel all these soft creatures heaped upon me. I felt I was in a monstrous spider's web. I was overpowered and went down. I felt little teeth nipping at my neck. I rolled over, and as I did so, my hand came against my iron lever. It gave me strength. I struggled up, shaking the human rats from me, and holding the bar short, I thrust where I judged their faces might be. I could feel the succulent giving flesh and bone under my blows, and for a moment I was free. The strange exultation that so often seems to accompany hard fighting came upon me. I knew that both I and Weena were lost, but I determined to make the Morlocks pay for their meat. I stood with my back to a tree, swinging the iron bar before me. The whole wood was full of the stir and cries of them. A minute passed. Their voices seemed to rise higher pitch of excitement, and their movements grew faster, yet none came within reach. I stood glaring at the blackness, and suddenly came hope. What if the Morlocks were afraid? And close at the heels of that came a strange thing. The darkness seemed to grow luminous. Very dimly I began to see the Morlocks about me. 3 battered at my feet, and then I recognized with incredulous surprise that the others were running in an incessant stream, as it seemed, from behind me and away through the wood in front, and their backs seemed no longer white, but reddish. As I stood agape, I saw a little red spark go drifting across a gap of starlight between the branches and vanish. And at that I understood the smell of burning wood, the slumberous murmur that was growing now into a gusty roar, red glow and the Morlocks aflight. Stepping out from behind my tree and looking back, I saw through the black pillars of the nearer trees the flames of the burning forest. It was my first fire coming after me. With that I looked for Weena, but she was gone. The hissing and crackling behind me, the explosive thud as each fresh tree burst into flame, left little time for reflection. My iron bar still gripped, I followed in the Morlock's path. It was a close race. Once the flames crept forward so swiftly on my right as I ran that I was outflanked and had to strike off to the left. At last I emerged upon a small open space, and as I did so, a Morlock came blundering towards me and past me and went on straight into the fire. And now I was to see the most weird and horrible thing I think of all that I had beheld in that future age. This whole space was bright as day with the reflection of the fire. In the centre was a hillock or tumulus surrounded by a scorched hawthorn. Beyond this was another arm of the burning forest, with yellow tongues already writhing from it, completely encircling the space with a fence of fire. Upon the hillside were some 30 or 40 mill logs, dazzled by the light, and eat and blunder and fur hither and thither against each other in their bewilderment. At first I did not realize their blindness, and struck furiously at them with my bar in a frenzy of fear, as they approached me, killing one and crippling several more. But when I had watched the gestures of one of them groping under the hawthorn against the red sky, and heard their moans, I was assured of their absolute helplessness and misery in the glare, and I struck no more of them. Yet every now and then one would come straight towards me, setting loose a quivering horror that made me quick to elude him. At one time the flames died down somewhat, and I feared the foul creature would presently be able to see me. I was even thinking of beginning the fight by killing some of them before this should happen. The fire burst out again brightly, and I stayed my hand. I walked about the hill among them and avoided them, looking for some trace of Weena, and Weena was gone. At last I sat down on the summit of the hillock and watched this strange, incredulous company of blind things groping to and fro, making uncanny noises to each other as the glare of the fire beat on them. The coiling uprush of smoke streamed across the stride, and through the rare tatters of that red canopy, remote as though they belonged to another universe, shone the little stars. 2 or 3 Morlocks came blundering into me, and I drove them off with blows from my fist, trembling as I did so. For the most part of that night, I was persuaded it was a nightmare. I bit myself and screamed in a passionate desire to awake. I beat the ground with my hands, got up and sat down again. I wandered here and there and again sat down. Then I would fall to rubbing my eyes and calling upon a god to let me wake. Thrice I saw Morlock put their heads down in a kind of agony and rush into the flames. But at last, above the subsiding red of the fire, above the streaming masses of black smoke and the whitening and blackening tree stumps and the diminishing numbers of these dim creatures, came the white light of the day. I searched again for traces of Weena, but there were none. It was plain that I had left that poor little body in the forest. I cannot describe how it relieved me to think that it had escaped the awful fate to which seemed destined. As I thought of that, I was almost moved to begin a massacre of the helpless abominations about me. But I contained myself. The hillock, as I have said, was a kind of island in the forest. From its summit I could now make out through a haze of smoke the palace of green porcelain, and from that I could get my bearings for the White Sphinx. And so, leaving the remnant of these damned souls still going hither and thither and moaning as the day grew clearer up, I tied some grass about my feet and limped on across smoking ashes and among black stems. It still pulsated internally with fire towards the hiding space of the time machine. I walked slowly, for I was almost exhausted, as well as lame, and I felt the intense wretchedness for the horrible death of little Weena. It seemed an overwhelming calamity. Now, in this old familiar room, it is more like a sorrow of a dream than actual loss. That morning it left me absolutely lonely again, terribly, alone. I began to think of this house of mine, and this fireside, and some of you, and with such thoughts came a longing that was pain. As I walked over the morning ashes under the bright morning sky, I made a discovery. In my trouser pocket were still some loose matches. The box must have leaked before it were lost. I shall say on this chapter that it was a terrible struggle for an excellent example of the innate suffering of life, of the way that all life must flail and suffer as it dies, must fight and try and survive. What is going on? All things end, yet all things fight to stay alive. Inevitability is not inevitable. As long as there is strength in the limbs, as long as there is will in the art, as long as something remains that will fight, then there is fights to be had. As long as there is a being with a big heart, and a wickedness of the eye, there is nothing that can fight, there is everything to be gained. You are a rat, and a rat, when cornered, will fight. Get out of me! Get out. I can see that, I felt that. I don't know what that is, or what that was. But this is my body. And for all that this great library is lamps, this little corner of it is mine. I built it, I made it, I found what was here and I took it by myself. I don't know what that is, but it cannot have me. I did not like that. I remember it this time. I saw it from behind my own eyes, trapped inside myself. I do not like to be a prisoner. Do not like to be trapped down here, but less I like to be trapped within myself. Whatever that thing was, it will not be allowed. I am in control. What is that thing, lad? Great. Helpful as always. Well, there then is life. In that last chapter, triumph preceding tragedy, struggle the only constant, needs, hunger, thirst, sleep, fire, always fire, protector and destroyer, and death, another constant, but never inevitable, never until the last is beat, the last beat of the arc. If there is still one more to come, then there is life and there is hope. Always striving onwards, even in terrible tragedy and loss. There, man strives, there we all strive. Rat and cat and dog, and Eloy and Morlock, no doubt. There for the love of life. Now excuse me a moment, I'll have a drink and then I'll finish this. And our guest will not return. So I say. I do not like this place. I do not like this book that is beneath me. I do not like what is happening here. But I am eternally myself. Better to be alone and still be me. I have such terrible company. Now let's press on. I said we'd finish this tonight, and we will. Chapter 10. About 8 or 9 in the morning I came to the same seat of yellow metal from which I had viewed the world upon the evening of my arrival. I thought of my hasty conclusions upon that evening, and could not refrain from laughing bitterly at my confidence. Here were the same beautiful scene, the same abundant foliage, the same splendid palaces and magnificent ruins, the same silver river running between its fertile banks. The gay robes of the beautiful people moved hither and thither among the trees. Some were bathing in exactly the place where I had saved Weena, and that suddenly gave a keen stab of pain. And like blots upon the landscape rose the couplers above the way of the underworld. I understood now what all the beauty of the upperworld people covered. Very pleasant was their day, as pleasant as the day of the cattle in the field. Like the cattle they knew no enemy and provided against no needs. And their end were the same. I grieved to think how brief the dream of the human intellect had been. It had committed suicide. It had set itself steadfastly towards comfort and ease, a balanced society with security and permanency as its watchword. It attained its hopes. It got to this at last. Once, life and property must have reached almost absolute safety. The rich had been assured of wealth and comfort, the toiler assured of his life and work. No doubt in that perfect world there were no unemployed problems, no social question left unsolved. A great quiet had followed. It is a law of nature we overlook. Intellectual versatility is a compensation for change, danger and trouble. An animal perfectly in harmony with its environment is a perfect mechanism. Nature never appeals to intelligence. Until habit and instinct are useless. There is no intelligence where there is no change and no need of change. Only those animals partake of intelligence that have to meet a huge variety of needs and dangers. So as I see it, the upper world man drifted towards his feeble pettiness and the underworld to a mere mechanical industry. That perfect state had lacked one thing for mechanical perfection: absolute permanency. Apparently as time went on, the feeding of the underworld, whether it was affected, had become disjointed. Mother Necessity, who had been staved off for a few thousand years, came back again, and she began Belial. The underworld, being in contact with machinery, which however perfect still needs some little thought of outside of habit, probably retained performance, rather more initiative, if less of every other human character than the upper. When other meat failed them, they turned to what old habits they hitherto forbid. So I say I saw it in my last view of the world of 802,701. It may be as wrong an explanation as mortal wit could invent. It is how the thing shaped itself to me, as that I'll give it unto you. After the fatigues, excitements, and terrors of the past days, and in spite of my grief, this seat and this tranquil view, the warm white sunlight, were very pleasant. I was very tired and sleepy, and soon my theorising passed into dozing. Catching myself at that, I took my own in, and spreading myself out on top of the turf, I had a long and refreshing sleep. I awoke a little before sunset, and now felt safe against being caught napping by the Morlocks, and stretching myself, I came on down the hill towards the White Sphinx. I had my crowbar in one hand, and the other hand played with the matches in my pocket. And now came a most unexpected thing. As I approached the pedestal of the Sphinx, I found the bronze valves were open. They had slid down into grooves. At that I stopped before them, hesitating to enter. Within were a small apartment, and on a raised place in the corner of this was a time machine. I had the small levers still in my pockets. So here, after all my elaborate preparations for the siege of the White Sphinx, was a meek surrender. I threw my iron bar away, almost sorry not to use it. A sudden thought came into my head as I strode towards the portal. For once at least I grasped the mental operations of the Morlocks. Suppressing a strong inhalation and laugh, I stepped through the bronze frame and up to the time machine. I was surprised to find it had been carefully oiled and cleaned. I had suspected since that the Morlocks had even partially taken it to pieces while trying in their dim way to grasp its purpose. Now, as I stood and examined it, finding a pleasure in the mere touch of the contrivance, the thing I had expected happened. The bronze spanel suddenly slid up and struck the frame with a clang. I was in the dark, trapped, so the Morlocks thought, and I chuckled gleefully. I could already hear their murmurings, laughter as they came towards me. Very calmly I tried to strike a match. I had only to fix on the levers and depart like a ghost. But I had overlooked one little thing. The matches were of that abominable kind that light only on the box. You may imagine how all my calm vanished. The little brutes were close upon me. One touched me. I made a sweep and blow in the dark at them with the levers, and began to scramble into the saddle of the machine. Then came one hand upon me, and then another. Then I had simply to fight against their persistent fingers for my levers, and at the same time feel for the stud over which these fitted. One indeed they almost got away from me. It slipped from my hand, I had to burr and fight in the dark for it with my head. I could hear the Morlock's skull ring and recover it. It were a nearer thing than the fights in the forest, I think, this last scramble. But at last the lever was fixed and pulled over. The clinging hand slipped from me. The darkness presently fell from my eyes. I found myself in the same grey light and tumult I have already described. I have already told you the sickness and confusion that comes with time travelling, and this time I was not seated properly in the saddle but sideways in an unstable fashion. For an indefinite time I clung to the machines and swayed, vibrating. Quite uneven now I went. When I brought myself to look at the dials again, I was amazed to find where I had arrived. One day I records days, another thousands of days, another millions of days, another thousands of millions. Now, instead of reversing the levers, I pulled them over so as to go forward with them. When I came to look at these indicators, I found that thousands of hands were sweeping round as fast as the second hand of a watch, in a futurity. As I drove on, a peculiar change swept over the appearance of things. The palpitating greyness grew darker, and though I was still travelling with prodigious velocity, the blinking succession of day and night, which were usually indicative of a slower pace, returned and grew more and more marked. This puzzled me very much at first. The gyrations of night and day grew slower and slower, and so did the passage of the sun across the sky, until they seemed to stretch through centuries. At last a steady twilight brooded over the earth, the twilight only broken now and then when a comet glared across the darkened sky. The band of light that indicated the sun had long since disappeared, but the sun had ceased to set. It simply rose and fell in the west, and grew ever broader and more red. All trace of the moon had vanished. The circle of the stars growing slower and slower, they giving place to creeping points of light. At last, some time before I stopped, the sun, red and very large, halted motionless upon the horizon, a vast dome glowing with a dull heat, and now and then a suffering momentary extinction. At one time it had for a little while glowed more brilliantly again, but it speedily reverted to a sullen red heat. I perceived by this slowing down of its rising and setting that the work of the tidal drag were done. The earth had come to rest with one face to the sun, even as in our own time the moon faces the earth. Very cautiously, for I remembered my former headlong fall, I began to reverse my motion. Slower and slower went the circling hand, until 1,001 seemed motionless, and the daily one was no longer a mere mist upon a scale. Still slower until the dim outlines of a desolate beach grew visible. I stopped very gently and sat upon the time machine, looking round. The sky was no longer blue. Northeastward it were inky black, and out of the blackness shone brightly and steadily pale white stars. Overhead it were a deep Indian red, starless, and southeastward it grew brighter on a glowing scar, but where cut by the horizon lay the huge hole of the sun, red and motionless. The rocks about me were of a harsh reddish colour, and all the trace of life that I could see at first was the intensely green vegetation that covered every projecting point on the southeastern face. It was the same rich green that one sees on forest moss or the lichen in caves, plants which like these grow in perpetual twilight. The machine was standing on a sloping breach. The sea stretched away to the southwest to rise on a sharp bright horizon against the wan sky. There were no breakers and no waves, for not a breath of wind was stirring. Only a slight oily swell rose and fell like a gently breathing, and showed that the eternal sea was still moving and living. And along the margin where the water sometimes broke was a thick incrustation of salt, pink under the lurid sky. There was a sense of oppression in my head, and I noticed that I was breathing very fast. The sensation reminded me of my only experience of mountaineering, and from that I judged the air to be more rarefied than it is now. Far away up the desolate slope I heard an harsh scream, and saw a thing like a huge white butterfly go slanting and fluttering up into the sky, and circling to disappear over some low hillock beyond. The sound of its voice was so dismal that I shivered, and seated myself more firmly upon the machine. Looking round me again, I saw that quite near, what I had taken to be a reddish mass of rock, were moving slowly towards me. Then I saw the thing was really a monstrous crab-like creature. Can you imagine a crab as large as yonder table, its many legs moving slowly and uncertainly, its big claws swaying, its long antennae like carters' whips, waving and feeling, and its stalked eyes gleaming at you on either side of its metallic front. Its back was corrugated and ornamented with ungainly bosses, and a greenish incrustation blotched it here and there. I could see the many palps of its complicated mouth flickering and feeling as it moved. As I stared at this sinister apparition crawling towards me, I felt a tickling on my cheek, as though a fly had lighted there. I tried to brush it away with my hand, but in a moment it returned, and almost immediately came another by my ear. I struck at this and caught something thread-like. It was drawn swiftly out of my hand. With a frightful calm, I turned and saw that I had grasped the antennae of another monstrous crab that stood just behind me. Its evil eyes were wiggling on their stalks, its mouth were all alive with appetite, and its vast ungulated claws, smeared with an algal slime, were descending upon me. In a moment my hand was on the lever, and I placed the month between myself and these monsters. I was still on the same breach, and I saw them distinctly now, as soon as I stopped. Dozens of them seemed to be crawling here and there in the sombre light, and among the foliage of intense green. I cannot convey the sense of abominable desolation that hung over the world. The red eastern sky, the northward blackness, the sub-dead sea, the stony beach crawling with these foul, slow-staring monsters, the uniform poisonous-looking green of the lichenous plants, the thick air of one's lungs, all contributed to an appalling effect. I moved on 100 years, and there were the same red sun, a little larger, a little duller, the same dying sea, the same chill air, and the same crowd of earthy crustaceans creeping in and out among the green weed and the red rocks. And in the westward sky I saw a pale line like a vast new moon. So I travelled, stopping ever again in great strides of 1,000 years or more, drawn on by the mystery of the earth's fate, watching with a strange fascination as the sun grew larger and duller in westward sky, and the life of that old earth ebbed away. At last, more than 30 million years hence, the huge red-hot dome where the sun had come would see Europe nearly a tenth part of the darkening heavens. Then I stopped once more, for the crawling multitudes of crabs had disappeared, Red beach, save for its livid green liverworts and lichens, seemed lifeless, now flecked with white. A bit of cold assailed me. Rare white flakes ever and again came eddying down. To the northeastwards, the glare of snow lay under the starlight of the sable sky, and I could see an undulating crest of hillocks, pinkish white. There were a fringe of ice along the sea margin, drifting masses further out, but the main expanse of that salt ocean, all bloody under the eternal sunset, was still unfrozen. I looked about me to see if any traces of animal life remained. A certain indefinable apprehension still kept me in the saddle of the machine, but I saw nothing moving in earth or sky or sea. Green slime on the rocks alone testified that life was not extinct. A shallow sandbank had appeared in the sea and the water had receded from the beach. I fancied I saw some black object flapping about on this bank, but it became motionless as I looked at it, and I judged that my eye had been deceived, and the black object was merely a rock. The stars in the sky were intensely bright and seemed to me to twinkle very little. Suddenly I noticed that the circular westward outline of the sun had changed. That a concavity, a bay, had appeared in the curve. I saw this grow larger. For a minute perhaps I stared aghast at this blackness that was creeping over the day, and I realised that an eclipse was beginning. Either the moon or the planet Mercury were passing across the sun's disk. Naturally at first I took it to be the moon. There was much to incline me to believe that what I really saw was the transit of an inner planet passing very near the Earth. The darkness grew apace. A cold wind began to blow in freshening gusts from the east. The shower and white flakes in the air increased in number. From the edge of the sea came a ripple and whisper. Beyond these lifeless sounds, the world was silent. Silent? It would be hard to convey the stillness of it. All the sounds of man, the bleating of sheep, cries of birds, the hum of insects, the stir that makes the background of our lives. All that were over. As the darkness thickened, the eddying flakes grew more abundant, dancing before my eyes, and the cold of the air more intense. Passed one by one, swiftly, one after the other, the white peaks of the distant hill vanished in the blackness. The breeze rose to a moaning wind. I saw the black central shadow of the eclipse sweeping towards me. In another moment the pale stars alone were visible. All else were rayless obscurity. The sky were absolutely black. The horror of this great darkness came upon me. The cold that smoked in my marrow and the pain I felt in breathing overcame me. I shivered, and a deadly nausea seized me. Then, like a red-hot bow in the sky, appeared the edge of the sun. I got off the machine and recovered myself. I felt giddy and incapable of facing the return journey. As I stood sick and confused, I saw again the moving thing upon the shoal. There was no mistake now that it were a moving thing against the red water of the sea. It were a round thing the size of a football perhaps, or it may be bigger. The tentacles trailed down from it. They seemed black against the weltering blood-red water, and were hopping fitfully about. Then I felt I was fainting. A terrible dread of lying helpless in that remote and awful twilight sustained me, while I pounded upon the saddle. That's the end of chapter 11. I don't know if I stopped for chapter 10. I don't think I did. I'm just pushing on. Still, there's plenty to be inferred here. The desperate fight and struggle against the Morlocks, I think I encapsulated pretty well in my previous thing, but the sight of a dead world, or a world overrun with monstrous beings, crabs. It's a very bleak idea. All in all, this seems a very dismal sort of book. But then there's something dismal about it, isn't it? The future. And the past. It is somewhat a dismal thing to dwell upon, what will be and what has been. Perhaps that's the lesson then in the time machine. That to dwell on what is not is a folly, and that we must live ourselves in the moment. But then that's foolish as well, isn't it? I certainly worry about what's going to happen with me, how much longer I'll be alone down here, and there are lessons to be taken from the past. Now perhaps it's not fair to say that the past is really covered in this. Perhaps that too is a lesson here. It is a terrible thing to dwell on the future, and it is also a thing we cannot avoid. The future is coming, whether we want it to or not. At any rate, let's push on then. Chapter 12. So I came back. For a long time I must have been insensible upon the machine. The blinking succession of the days and nights were resumed. The sun got golden again and the sky blue. I breathed with greater freedom. The fluctuating contours of the land ebbed and flowed. The hands spun backward upon the dials. At last I saw again the dim shadows of houses, the evidences of decadent humanity. These too changed and passed, and others came. Presently, when the million dial was at zero, I slackened the speed. I began to recognise our own petty and familiar architecture. 1,000 hands ran back to the starting point. The night and day flapped slower and slower, and the old walls of the laboratory came about me. Very gently now I slowed the mechanism down. I saw one little thing that seemed odd to me. I think I've told you that when I set out, before my velocity became high, Miss Watchett had walked across the room, travelling as it seemed to me like a rocket. As I returned, I passed again across that minute when she traversed the laboratory. But now her every motion appeared to be the exact inversion of her previous one. The door at the lower end opened, and she glided quietly up the laboratory, back foremost, disappeared behind the door by which she had previously entered. Just before that, I seemed to see Hilliers for a moment as she passed like a flash. Then I stopped the machine and saw about me again the old familiar laboratory. My tools, my appliances, just as I had left them. I got off the thing very shakily and sat down upon my bench. For several minutes I trembled violently. Then I became calmer. Around me were my old workshop again, exactly as it had been. I might have slept there and the old thing had been a dream. And yet not exactly. The thing had started from the south-east corner of the laboratory. It had come to rest against the northwest, against the wall where you saw it. It gives you the exact distance from my little lawn to the pedestal of the White Sphinx, in which the Morlocks had carried my machine. For a time my brain went stagnant. Presently I got up and came through the passage here, limping because my heel was still painful, and feeling sorely begrimed. I saw the Pall Mall Gazette on the table by the door. I found the date were indeed today, and looking at the timepiece saw the hour was almost 8 o'clock. I heard your voices and the clatter of plates. I hesitated. I felt so sick and weak. Then I sniffed good wholesome meat and opened the door on you. You know the rest. I washed and dined, and now I am telling you the story. I know, he said after a pause. All this will be absolutely incredible to you. To me the one incredible thing is that I am here tonight, in this old familiar room, looking on your friendly faces and telling you the strange adventures. He looked at the medical man. No, I cannot expect you to believe it. Take it as a lie, or a prophecy. Say I dreamed it in the workshop. Consider I have been speculating upon the destinies of our race until I add to this fiction. Treat my assertion of the truth as a mere stroke of art to enhance its interest. And taking it as a story, what do you think of it? He took up his pipe, began in his old accustomed manner to tap with it nervously upon the guards of the grate. There was a momentary stillness, then chairs began to creak, and shoes to scrape upon the carpet. I took my eyes off the time traveller's face and looked around at his audience. They were in the dark, and little spots of colour swam before them. The medical man seemed absorbed in the contemplation of our host. He had it all looking hard at the end of his cigar. The sick journalist fumbled for his watch. The others, as far as I remember, were motionless. The editor stood up with a sigh. What a pity is you're not a writer of stories, he said, putting his hand on the time traveller's shoulder. You don't believe it? Well, I thought not. The time traveller turned to us. Where are the matches? He said. He lit one and spoke over his pipe, puffing. To tell you the truth, I hardly believe it myself. And yet. His eye fell with a mute inquiry upon the weathered white flowers upon the little table. Then he turned over the hand holding his pipe, and I saw he was looking at some half-healed scars in his knuckles. The medical man rose, came to the lamp, and examined the flowers. The Gynoceums, odd, he said. The psychologist leant forward to see, holding out his hand for a specimen. I'm hanged if it isn't 1:45, said the journalist. How shall we get home? Plenty of cabs at the station, said the psychologist. It's a curious thing, said the medical man, but I certainly don't know the natural order of these flowers. I have them. The time traveller hesitated. And certainly not. Where did you really get them? Said the medical man. The time traveller put his hand to his head. He felt like one who was trying to keep hold of an idea that eluded him. They were put in my pocket by Weena when I travelled in at a time. He stared around the room. I'm damned if it isn't all going. This room and you and the atmosphere every day is too much for my memory. Did I ever make a time machine or model of a time machine? Or is it all only a dream? They say life is a dream, a precious poor dream at times. I can't stand another that won't fit. It's madness. Where did the dream come from? I must look at that machine, if there is one. He caught up the lamp swiftly and carried it, flaring red, through the door into the corridor. We followed him. There, in the flickering light of the lamp, the machine, sure enough, squat and ugly and askew. A thing of brass, ebony, ivory, and translucent grimmer and quartz. Solid to the touch, for I put out my hand and felt the rail of it. The brown spots and smears from the ivory, and bits of grass and moss upon the lower parts, and one rail bent awry. The time traveller put the lamp down on the bench and ran his hand along the damaged rail. "It's all right now," he said. "The story I told you was true. I'm sorry to have brought you out here in the cold." He took up the lamp, and in absolute silence we returned to the smoking room. He came into the hall with us and helped the editor on his coat. The medical man looked into his face and with a certain hesitation told him he was suffering from overwork, which he laughed hugely. I remember him standing in the open doorway, bawling good night. I shared a cab with the editor. He thought the tale a gaudy lie. For my own part, we were unable to come to a conclusion. The story was so fantastic and incredible, the tone so credible and sober. I lay awake most of the night thinking about it. I was going to go next day and see the time traveller again. I was told he were in the laboratory, and be on uneasy terms in the house. I went up to him. The laboratory, however, were empty. I stared for a minute at the time machine, put up my hand and touched the lever. At that, the squat, insubstantial-looking mass swayed like a bough shaken by the wind. Its instability startled me extremely, and I had a queer reminiscence of childish days when I used to be forbidden to meddle. I came back through the corridor. The time traveller met me in the smoking room. They were coming from the house. He had a small camera under one arm and a knapsack under the other. He laughed when he saw me and gave me an elbow to shake. "I'm frightfully busy," he said, "with that thing in there." "Is it not smokes?" I said. "Do you really travel through time?" "Really and truly I do." And he looked frankly into my eyes. He hesitated, his eyes wandering about the room. "I only want half an hour," he said. "I know where you came, and it's awfully good of you. There's some magazines here. If you stop to lunch, I'll provide you this time traveller. I'll prove you this time traveller, the ilk, specimens and all. If you'll forgive my leaving you now." I consented, hardly comprehending the full import of his words, and he nodded and went on down the corridor. I heard the door of the laboratory slam, seated myself in a chair and took up a daily paper. What was I going to do before lunchtime? And I was reminded by an advertisement that I had promised to meet Richardson, the publisher at 2. I looked at my watch and saw that I could barely save the engagement. I got up and went down the passage to tell the time traveller. As I took hold of the handle of the door, I heard an exclamation, oddly truncated at the end, and a click and a thud. A gust of air whirled around me. As I opened the door, and from within came the sound of broken glass falling on the floor. The time traveller were not there. I seemed to see a ghostly, indistinct figure sitting in a whirling mass of black and brass for a moment, a figure so transparent that the bench behind him, with its sheets of drawings, was absolutely distinct. This phantasm vanished as I rubbed my eyes. The time machine had gone, save for a subsiding stir of dust. The further end of the laboratory were empty. A pane in the skylight had apparently just been blown out. I felt an unreasonable amazement. I knew that something strange had happened, but for a moment could not distinguish what the strange thing might be. As I stood staring, the door into the garden opened, and the manservant appeared. We looked at each other, then ideas began to come. "Has Mr. gone out that way?" said I. "No, sir. No one has come out this way. I was expecting to find him here." And that I understood. At the risk of disappointing Richardson, I stayed on, waiting for the time traveller. Waiting for the second perhaps. Still stranger story, and the specimens and photographs he would bring with him. But I'm beginning now to fear that I must wait a lifetime. The time traveller vanished 3 years ago. As everybody knows now, he has never returned. There's an epilogue, but it's only a page, so I think I'll do that before I do my last commentary. One cannot choose but wonder, will he ever return? It may be that he swept back into the past and fell among the blood-drinking, airy savages of an age of unpolished stone, into the abysses of the Cretaceous Sea, or among the grotesque saurians, the huge reptilian brutes of the Jurassic times. He may even now, if I may use the phrase, be wandering on some plesiosaurus haunted oolitic coral reef, or beside the lonely saline lakes of the Triassic age. Or did he go forward into one of the nearer ages, in which all men are still men, with the riddles of our own time answered and its wearisome problems solved? And the manhood of the race, for I, my own part, cannot think that these latter days are of weeks of experiment, fragmentary theory and mutual discord are indeed man's culminating time. I say for my own part, I know, the question had been discussed among us long before the time machine was made, thought but cheerlessly of the advancement of mankind, and saw in the growing pile of civilization only a foolish heaping that must inevitably fall back upon and destroy its makers in the end. If that is so, it remains for us to live as though it were not so. But to me, the future is still black and blank. It is a vast ignorance, lit as a few casual places by the memory of his story. And I have by me, for my comfort, 2 strange white flowers, shriveled down, brown and flat and brittle, to witness that even when my strength was gone, gratitude and mutual tenderness still loved on in the art of man. And that's the end of the time machine. I'm not really sure what I think of that one, really, if I'm honest. I mean, it was a good text, but I struggled with it quite a lot. And maybe that's not his fault, maybe it's not fair for me to judge it on that, because I think the placement of it in my library has been unfair to it. In fact, let me, if you'll excuse me a moment, let me get somewhere a little more comfortable. Yeah, what was it? Yeah, I think the placement of it in my library has made it a little unfortunate. And it's quite a bleak story too. I stand by my notion of that the ideas it supposits about the future are quite grim. In a way, it is almost the opposite of London to my mind. And I think they're right about the same time. London speaks of a more primeval sort of age, an age that perhaps was still around at his time, but a rougher wild, a world that is not yet tame. And Earls, he talks of a future that is fully tame, a world that is a garden where all needs are met, at least to a certain extent. And yet while London considers this wild, untamed world of savage and bestial nature somehow superior to the world we live in, a soft subsistence in San Francisco, at least to a certain extent, Wells sees this beautiful world, this garden future world, as a terrible fate, an unimaginable horror, for it unmakes you. Indeed, there's enough synchronicity between the two of them that I can see. It seems to me that man, in its final future as imagined by Wells, has inflicted upon itself the terrible fate it inflicts on dogs in London's novel. The gift of ease and of love, of dependence. Man becomes dependent on another that is itself automated. Does all its duties for itself without need, so that it becomes dependent on itself or those mechanisms that it has made to do those duties. And in so doing, feels the pain of that dependence. The pain of the dog reduced in form to be a lap dog, or some strange breed, twisted by the needs of mankind. It is a cruel and ironic fate, perhaps even the deserved one, but I think no the less awful for that. No the less awful indeed, Lord. Well, perhaps I'm a smidge maudlin. Certainly I experienced something myself that we were not so pleasant a fate, or near enough I did. But still, so for now that it is done, the book is read, I'm almost tempted now to starting on Dubliners, that other text I have, but I think I will hold off. I think perhaps this has been enough for me. I'll take my rest and start on it tomorrow. Maybe go out into the library and try and find something else to read, if it does not excite me, though I'm sure no, what am I saying? It's a good book and I need to read them or get through Dubliners. Same as I got through this. I'll stay away from that book for a while, the bad one, beneath Time Machine. And I'll try not to think of my art and the pity I feel for the Morlocks. Next time I see one of the beasts that is down here among this library, and wonder what it is that makes an animal so terribly strange. Anyway, to anyone who has watched this, though I think no one is here, I thank you for sticking with it. I hope you've gleaned something from this, and I hope that my visitor were not too terrible to you while I were away. I apologise for him. I assure you I shall do my utmost to keep him away in future. I wish I were not underground, but for all my mistrust of him, and my mislike of him, I do have the constant companionship of a very good lamp. Anyhow, enough for now. I wish you farewell.